Another round. I'm back. One of you asked me, when am I going to do more of these videos? Right now. Actually, multiple of you have asked me that. If I tallied up the most frequently commented comment on anything here, when are we going to get more of the Jordan Peterson videos? The We Who Wrestle with God videos. They're here. And God willing, twice a week until it's done. So, or unless one of these has to come out, like 2 days ago. But we're here, chapter a week, and this takes me freaking ever to do. So my apologies. This book takes me longer than most books I've read. So I'm averaging about 5-ish minutes a page. So, and that's just because of how I take it in and reread it. And it definitely challenges my mind. I take a lot of breaks reading it, need to like walk and stuff. So, which is good. This is a good stretch for me, but heavily delayed for everyone. I mean, I bought this and posted the video November 19th, and today is March 21st. So, no great excuse. But here we are, continuing We Who Wrestle with God. And we are on chapter 2. Beautiful pictures. If you don't own a copy of this, it's one thing this author does well with his books is puts in good pictures. Chapter 2, Adam, Eve, Pride, Self-Consciousness, and the Fall. I said in the first two videos, and I'm going to say it again in this one. It's kind of all over the place. I mean, the central topic is the chapter name. That's true. But in a lot of ways, I feel like you kind of jump around. It's divided into 7 subchapters, indicated by these little guys. 2.1, the image of God in the eternal garden. So it's broken down into, I wouldn't call them bite-sized portions. I would say meal-sized portions. The paragraphs are more bite-sized, and even that's pushing it for that kind of languaging. However, there was a lot to take from this chapter. Um, a lot that I reflected on, and I think it's one of those chapters. And if you've read the Bible, everything in this context, Adam and Eve context, is highly discussed, highly debated. Um, Implications of the fall, what the biblical account of a world before sin, suffering, death looked like. Um, Even some debate on what actually is original sin. Is it Eve taking the apple? Is it Adam uh, blaming her and God for his actions? Is it some sort of hidden sin of how did the snake get into the garden in the first place? It's just ripe for debate and discussion, as it has been for thousands of years. And we're here today doing the same thing. So just knowing that. So I'm going to go through this like I have before, and we're going to see just kind of what happens and how long this video actually ends up being. The first section I mentioned, section 2.1, the image of God in the eternal garden. He points out a word, kenotic, which is roughly meaning, and I'm going to look up this exact definition. There are footnotes galore in this reading, which I do appreciate. That is not a criticism at all, but it also slows me down, as I've said about everything in this book. Derivative from the word kenosis, meaning the act of emptying. So that being used as a interesting introduction here. The citation actually comes from Philippians 2:5-9, saying, "Let the same mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself." It's the kenosis derivative, taking the form of a slave, being born in a human likeness. So it's emptied in relationship, as I'm quoting, to the original, something that is an icon or even an avatar. He expands further, and you're going to see me go to the book and go back to my notebook on everything that I'm learning. So some of this is going to be summarized in my own words, like the previous videos. Sometimes it's direct quote. I won't necessarily probably cue you into when I'm quoting myself, but I will try to make sure I'm clear on when I'm quoting him. That being said, my takeaway here, which I found interesting, was that kenotic example is that in the description, in the context of this, describing humans being made in the image of God. but that isn't a copy paste image. It's a version of. It's a less full image, similar to how Christ emptied himself to take on human form. Think about that seemingly dichotomous statement of God is fully human and fully God, or sorry, Jesus is fully human and fully God. That's a sticking point for a lot of people. And this is, regardless of whether you're religious or not. And that's, again, a key point here. I'm not making religious arguments. The book is psychological, religious, and philosophical. As far as I'm concerned, the author doesn't believe in God or Christianity on a, like, I'm going to go to heaven sense. So I'm just addressing it as it's presented. But the understanding there that God is this all powerful being, but to become human, there's a humanness that has to be given, but he is still fully both, which is seemingly contradictory and I guess to some extent outside our sense of understanding. But that to become Christ, there has to be somewhat of an emptying, a limitation. So physicality as a limitation. I have a body. I feel physical pain. I need to eat and use the bathroom, and I can bleed, and I can get dust in my eyes, and it's uncomfortable. So there's an emptying version of that. Still God, but Christ. So sinless, but still able to experience humanness, and that humans are a removed step from that. That being made in God's image is still a removal to an extent, an emptying of that original vessel into us. Like when you have a cup of water and you pour it, it's not the full cup of water that it's poured from. Now, that analogy falls a little bit short because you could argue that the original vessel is emptier, and I think an understanding of this ethereal, past the fourth dimension idea of God wouldn't allow for that. But I think about it the same way. If you or I were to create a painting or a piece of music or amazing architecture, and let's say we do it multiple times, a series of artists, think about any popular artist that you know. A lot of people can see a Picasso work and know that's Picasso or a Monet, or in a more modern day sense, people like who is it? Thomas Kincaid is one of them. There's oh, what's his name? He's got a distinct one. I gotta figure. Michael Goddard. That's who I'm thinking of. Very black backgrounds and bright vibrancies. A lot of martini glasses that are anthropomorphic with their olives in them and all this stuff. So um, we see these artists, and we know, oh, that's so and so artist, and it's because there's a certain level of emptying of their identity and their self into the work that they do, and that maybe is a better representation of how to understand our likeness to God is to another spiritual being. They could see humans perhaps and be able to say, oh, that's one of the things that God made. So just an interesting thought there. Yeah. We're one paragraph in, 8 minutes into the video. It's going to speed up. But it's just an interesting, really interesting starting place in my mind for getting this going. So he continues on talking about how humans pursue rights and responsibility and this sense of deserving of dignity. One of the notes that I took, actually, let me quote from him very briefly. He says, "How could we possibly manage without the tradition of inalienable rights and intrinsic individual responsibility that is the logical consequence of the axiomatic proclamation of our sacred worth? That insistence is a notion both unlikely and significant beyond measure." So the takeaway that I pulled from that and in the following paragraphs here are, I'm just going to read from my notes more or less here, is that the immense value humans put into the pursuit of rights shows something deeply intrinsic in our view of inalienable rights. So why do we care is that sense. And I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't care about human rights. And we have different opinions on what that looks like. That's why we've had human rights issues for a long time, but it also is representative of why do we continue to have human rights activism? Why do we care about human rights at all? And yeah, I know there's people out there that are just pretty strong embodiments of what we can all point to as evil and action and behavior, and probably in soul as well. But why? Why do we care so much? Why do we look at someone in pain and say, I wish that wasn't going on? Like, and where does that wish come from? Why do we care enough to take action, but also why do we care at all? Or that person's in a tough situation. Why is that tough? If that's making sense, there's this deeper part of what it means to be a person, to be a human, that we really care about these things. And we care about being treated justly and rightly. And many people have a strong sense of that for self and for others, that it does matter. And again, even if you disagree on human values and what counts as a human right, you can still probably point to yourself and, if asked, what's the human right that you are owed just because you exist? Most people will give an answer to that, and some are, more restrictive, some are more open, but people will still have an answer. They'll say, well, as a human, this is my value, and that's their value as a human too, and this is why they should have this right. So yeah, just an interesting concept. And I continue on here with my notes to end this first section with, we all strive to cultivate our own version of the Garden of Eden, our own garden, and to know its boundaries so that we can accurately apply our attention towards proper stewardship. So this is something too that he talks about in the following pages there, is that we all have some form of true north that we point towards, something that humans will just respond to in a goal-oriented way when they feel like this is theirs. So we all can get stuck in treating things that are ours like garbage. We've all seen that, I think, in others and probably at times in our own selves. But that if you give someone a garden and they are interested in gardening and you say, this is yours, take care of it, they might do that. And that there's this direction towards, oh, this is mine. This is why people really want to know what's their responsibility when you get a job or when you're taking a new class and the syllabus is very clear on what this is your homework. This is when this is due. This is the learning objectives. Well, you're probably going to be more likely to get those done and to feel confident, potentially even in your grade. And we all have had those professors, I think, that seem to not use that syllabus as a point of reference for their own class. And that creates chaos because you don't know what to expect. Same with parenting, where maybe your parents allow things some days and not other days. And maybe, mom or dad are angry and now they're not angry, and it's confusing because you don't know what to expect. And it also makes it hard to want to steward something healthily. This is also why we can be discouraged if we're building a Lego set and a sibling knocks it down and then they do it again and then again, and then we get to the point where when the siblings are around, we just don't build anything because our garden is being destroyed. This stewarded piece of creativity and importance that's in our control is being destroyed, and we perhaps lose interest in that. So we do take aim in finding what we can cultivate, and I do think most people do that. And even people who are really like anti-work, oftentimes those are creative people. I'm very pro-work. That doesn't necessarily mean it has to look like every system that we find ourselves in, but I believe creativity is work as well. So someone who's anti-work but they're an artist, I'm like, you're not anti-work. Actually, you're anti something specific about work, but you actually really believe in work and a cultivating of your creative spirit, so to speak. My 2 cents on that. So going into section 2.2, pride versus the sacred moral order. A quote from him: the closer to God the presumption, the more care must be taken in its approach, let alone its rejection or revolutionary overthrow. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, something said in many forms by many people. So larger claims require more evidence, more or less, and smaller claims less so. For someone to say, if you're having a debate, is communism or capitalism better for the economy? Well, that's not a wise debate to just go, hey, let's just test one and see what happens, because it's got a magnitude effect. And it's also not a wise case to point to one country and say, they did it. This is what it looked like there. That's not a full picture. Now, we might not always have evidence for the fullest picture, but the implication and idea here being it's worth investigating when it's a bigger topic. The more extraordinary the question or topic, the more extraordinary the way that we find that answer uh, is needed to be. So, what I wrote here is that the larger the claim, the more evidence is necessary. The closer to God something is, the more care should be given to it, including our closeness to Him. So, two parts to that. One, and I'll start with the second one. If you go to church, it's fair to say that you should consider your clothes, your behavior, and your attitude and your interactions with other people with greater care while you're at church than when you're at home or when you're at work. Because if you believe that God is real, and that's His house in an earthly sense, are you really going to bring less of yourself to that? And that doesn't mean you're having a bad day and you feel like less of a person. No, it means the care attached to that, bringing your A game, so to speak. Are you more likely to bring your A game to work than to your bowling league? Especially casual bowling league, no stakes. Probably should bring more of your A game to work because it's more important. It's closer to a higher goal. There is the idea behind this. So it's just something to think about. The closer you are to God, so to speak, or to an important task, and just the more important something is, the push you have. First piece I said there, that the larger the claim, the more evidence is necessary. Yeah, I mean, a good example there is probably the economic one that I gave a minute ago, or that XYZ can help cause or cure cancer. That's a big statement, so you probably want to back that up by a lot of evidence. To say that people feel better when they hang out with friends, that's a really light claim. Now, if I were to say your life is better with friends, that's a bigger claim. If I were to say you are unhealthy if you don't have friends, that's a bigger claim. And some of this is subjective and relative, but I think we get the idea there. So larger claims, larger evidence. I think that's not an inappropriate statement, and I like the idea of it. I'm going to go on to his next quote, which is a bit of a thought exercise, another fun one here. He says, "When I was teaching at the University of Toronto, I often demonstrated this to my seminar students, choosing one of them to harass, asking him or her, 'Why did you do the readings for this class?' 'Because I wanted to be prepared for the discussion.' 'Why did it matter if you were thus prepared?' 'Well, because I wanted to do well in this class.' 'Why did you care to do well?' 'Because I wanted to pass the course.' 'Why does it matter to you if you pass this course?' 'Because I want to get my degree.' 'Why do you care to get your degree?' 'I want to be competitive in the job market after I graduate.' 'Why does such success make any difference to you?' It was at this point, climbing Jacob's ladder, or descending into the underworld, that the going often began to get difficult for the person so questioned. 'If I do not have a good job, I'll be miserable and have no money. Why does it matter to anyone, including you, if you are suffering and broke?' So you're not doing, end quote, just to be clear, you're not doing the class assignment just because. You're doing it often because it's connected with that last statement, I will suffer and have no money if I don't turn this assignment in, which isn't true, but it also is true at the same time. Take, for example, if I need to get up at 7 a.m. tomorrow and I go to bed at 3 a.m., I'm not going to get good sleep. Not happening. I'm going to get 4 hours at best, and that 4 hours will not be deep sleep. That'll be rough. It's better than nothing, but it ain't good. I can do that one time maybe and be fine. Have a bit of a difficult day. But how many days in a row can I do that before it potentially actually kills me? I could not drink water at all tomorrow, and I would live, be a little parched, but I'd be fine. And you could say, well, not drinking water today is not going to kill you. Right. But what if you tell me that again tomorrow? And then the next day? I will die eventually. So it's this weird mixture of it's true, but it's not. If I don't turn this assignment in, I'm going to destroy my life. It's true and not true at the same time, because on a singular space event, it is not true. But in a cumulative experience, it is true. And how we order ourselves to that truth matters, and how we let ourselves slip on little things. Is there room for slips to happen? I think yes. I think the bigger question is allowing them to be necessity. So you have perfect attendance at work, your spouse is having a baby, you have to miss work. And let's just say they don't let you have that off, you have to just take it off. You're probably not going to get fired for that because you attend every day, and you're probably not going to be broke because you attend every day. And it's a one-time event. Hey, I'm not just skipping. My spouse is having a baby. Or on an even lighter scale thing, you're just like, I'm not feeling it today. I can't come in. I'm actually sick. It's not sick enough for a doctor's note. I'm out of it. You're probably going to get off on that. That didn't sound right. You're probably going to get off the hook. That's better. And be permissed to do that because you're not making a habit of missing, and it's understandable and contextually is fine. So this is, to me, that kind of idea is we stretch up the reasoning for our actions to, I should even say stretch down, goal oriented up, but down in a deeper sense of self to why are we doing it? Um, and most of our fears are that. Why am I not acting on the thing? Because I'm afraid of something. There's a couple books I'm going to be doing here soon relative to getting through this tome. Stephen Pressfield's work in Turning Pro, and more specifically and more recommended, is The War of Art. That whole idea of what gets in the way of us doing things. And it's always deeper. Sometimes it's very simple, but there's a reason we're not doing something. And the note that I took here, and the reason that we are doing something, to be clear, my note is the lovely and infinite question of why. Why helps us regress and deconstruct our actions and motives. It helps us to better understand the point of our trajectories. This is why asking why can lead to extreme freedom and extreme pain. Because if we've just been chugging along and never asked why, and we're 4 years into a medical degree and actually start to wonder, why am I doing this? And I don't want to do it. That's a lot of lost time by some perspective. Now, that's great that you learned that now and not 4 more years down the line. But that can be freeing of like, I want to do this other thing, and I have joy, and I'm going to do this. And it can also bring suffering and pain because we think, oh, if only I would have known this 4 years ago. Or it can bring a certain pain of, I'm not the person I thought I was. What do I say yes to? What is the core of me calling out to? And that can be, you know, scary. Next quote from the author. There is no necessary place or point where the questioning ends. It can all too easily become the infinite regress that quells motivation and petrifies or paralyzes. Really good caveat to that. And in between the two quotes I gave, he offers a quote himself from the book Confessions by Leo Tolstoy. Not the popular Confessions by Augustine. This is Tolstoy's ones. But that statement there, that languaging is perfect. The infinite regress. You can do that ad infinitum to the point where it doesn't even matter what we're talking about or what we're saying. Why? Anyone who's spent any time with a toddler or a young child has probably experienced that infinite why. And you can get lost in that. I'm plugging this into the outlet. Why? So that it has power. Why? So that we can use it. Why does the outlet have power? I don't know. They just put it in there. Why don't you know? The electric company puts the power into the thing, and that's where it is. It's in there, and I don't know where it comes from. Why not? I didn't learn why the power, and then they might even ask more refined questions. Where does the power come from? The power station. Where did they get it? They mine it. They lightning catching. They're catching it. I don't know. And you're just get to the point where I don't know where it's electricity. It comes from. It's on the planet, and you can kind of get mad at your kid for your own inadequacy, which is funny because it's not really an inadequacy. Why should we know the deep answers to everything? At a certain point, we accept things, and that's okay. I plug it in, and I get power. Thank God our country has power. End of story. Now, if that was a more pressing issue, I'd have to learn how power works. I don't have to, so I move on and put that regressive attention towards a different topic that is more suited to my own infinite regress. Not quite to infinity, but towards a deeper questioning. And we do that. So, yeah. All right, concluding this section, the last quote for this section. Thus, a certain faith in cosmos, garden, and self constitutes a necessary foundation for forward movement, an inescapable foundation, even, because the alternative is the infinite regress of doubt and the descent into the abyss. So, more of what I already said, but the specificity of doubt and falling into an abyss of, if we're overly questioning, we can just fall into a place of I don't know anything, and not from a philosophical perspective of I know nothing and I need to be learning, but like a I'm not on solid ground because I'm so far down this rabbit hole that I don't know what's real. That's not helpful. The idea is you continue to go back, and here's my recommendation from a clinical perspective. You ask why until you don't know the answer. And then when you don't know the answer, you ask yourself, do I need to know this answer? Does the pursuit of this truth hold my progress at bay? Or does it encourage it? And if we identify that that truth is necessary to proceed, then we need to figure that truth out. And then figure that truth out. Don't start regressing tons of other topics. Go back until that one is there and you've decided, I'm okay not knowing. Great, move on. Or I need to know. Then figure that out. Don't regress for your religious beliefs, your political beliefs, the job you're doing, the partner you're with, the plans you made on Saturday, whatever. Pick one, because then you can just fall onto this just extreme situation of not knowing. Yeah. So, and thanks for bearing with my word stumbling. Yeah, that's my clinical advice. My last note on that section is that faith is required to avoid the uncertain abyss of doubt. We have to have a level of faith in order to avoid debilitation. If I had to know the answer to everything as fact, I couldn't exist. It's impossible. And that is not exaggeration. It is impossible. I just gave the example. I'm pointing at my outlet. That's why that. I don't know how it works, and that's fine. I have faith that it does through repetition, and it consistently does. And when it doesn't, I have faith that it's not the end of the world, that there's a solution. The power outage is happening again, or the circuit blew, or this is just burnt out. Um, it's not the end of the world. And even when those happen, when my faith is stumbled because the outlet doesn't work, I still have faith that someone can come in and fix it. And you could say that that's knowledge, but I don't know how it works. I don't have to. I just know that the things around it are going to be okay. So that's the argument there. On to part 3, the incompleteness of Adam and the arrival of Eve. Quote, unquote. Let me give a preface. We're going to get into a little bit of masculine, feminine. And I know people get very opinionated about male and female and roles, especially. And then, especially from a biblical perspective, even within church going people, complementarian versus egalitarian arguments. This is not the point of this video. And bear in mind, most of my clinical perspective is more of a masculine feminine. There are obvious differences in men and women from a biological perspective and a brain perspective, and those are actually extremely relevant to know when we're looking at personality and interventions, particularly, I'm not going to go off on a tangent there, but particularly how we treat depression in men versus women is a big deal. But more of my approach and the Jungian approach and this author's approach, he takes more stances on, not really roles, but he's say male and female more. But I would argue his stance, as well as Carl Jung, who he quotes a lot, and my stance, is it's more of a question of the feminine and the masculine as archetypal identities. So as a therapist, I'm going to show certain feminine archetypal characteristics. Doesn't mean I'm a feminine person. Doesn't mean I'm a woman. So we're not explicitly talking about male and female here as we go through this. It's more feminine and masculine, and I encourage that perspective if your default is male-female. So just a caveat to this section and really most of the rest of this chapter. So Quote, the male need to be attractive to women means that men will bend over backwards to provide, or, in the case of pathological men, appear to provide, whatsoever is desired by a potential mate. Women are much more likely than men to reject others, sexually and with regard to a relationship. They are much more likely to refuse a given sexual overture when so-called short-term mating opportunities arise. They also precipitate divorce in some 70% of cases. Further, women are more prone to engage in indirect relational aggression and gossip, with the end goal of socially ostracizing a potential rival. This proclivity arguably increases the self-consciousness of men. Women, with their higher capacity for decoding nonverbal behavior, are also more sensitive to displays of female physical attractiveness and, quote, mate poaching behavior such as flirting, and are likely to punish that harshly even among their friends. Quote, heaven has no rage, like love to hatred turned, nor hell a fury, like a woman scorned. Unquote. It's a dense paragraph, and actually within that paragraph, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 citations. So that's another thing. If you get the book, this is all research-backed stuff, which is very helpful when making certain claims. So that paragraph alone had 6 citations. My takeaway. Male self-consciousness is often related to female approval and mating opportunities, and women have awareness of this and often act in accordance to it. So this might seem like a why would I quote that or then quote my own notes. 2 reasons. One, there's an important line between getting into the state of mind of just referring to women as females and getting into this like alpha male set and like having all these opinions about male roles and female roles and recognizing actual things that are at play with men and women. And I prefer to lean towards the latter of those and not the former. Um, the healthy understanding of what makes us different should also be what helps connect us. So, identify, for instance, I have friends that are very different than me. And for me to act like we're exactly the same is silly, but it's also dismissive for me to not recognize what's the same. It's also dismissive for me to not recognize the differences that make them unique in who they are and how we integrate those into our friendship and our relationship. I think this is important for men and women, and that fuller understanding. And it's an issue with both men and women. I see plenty of men who, and that's more the talking point in modern days is where men need to get a better understanding of women, and I agree with that. There's also a huge disparity in women understanding men. And unfortunately, I don't think they're as aware of that in a collective sense as the way the media portrays it. I've met all types of people who are aware and unaware of that. So this is a person-to-person thing for sure. My comment there a moment ago was more on how it looks from a media political discussion point. So understanding our differences and similarities is quite helpful. So, okay, this next point. Men, in turn, benefit from an expansion of their self-consciousness and then consciousness under the pressure of women's heightened sensitivity, while also bearing the brunt of the harsh evaluation and rejection that is part and parcel of that gift. I starred this. Got a little star on it because I think it's important. My note here is that men benefit from women's sensitivity by letting women expand their self through awareness, both helpful and critical, encouraging and rejecting. I think this is important. That very common role that women can play in men's life, and to the extent that the man can humble himself, is any man who's acting in a way to impress women. When he does that, and the response is negative, how do you respond? And this is, I think, I don't really believe in like testing people all the time, but one of the best piece of advice I've ever gotten is to really test a person by their response to not getting what they want. And I say test in the sense of don't necessarily just actively deny, but pay attention when you deny them something they want. Do they respond in the positive or negative? This is something that you can see in a funny but also kind of depressing and bummer way in like the whole nice guy mentality. Um, there's nice girl stuff too. You can look it up on like Reddit and stuff like that if you dare. But the idea is that you're nice until you don't get what you want, and then you just accost and make sure that the other person is held accountable for your failure. It's crazy 180 flips if you've never seen that. I think as a woman, you've probably seen it more than the guys have, but there's a lot of guys that do that to women when they don't get what they want, and it's pretty wild. So, um, but if I'm called out for something, then can I respond in a way that is reflective? Like, oh, that was perceived as undesirable and unlikable. It's a way for my awareness to be called up of, oh shoot, that was called out. And I could do a whole video on this of the amount of times I've been called out and seen it in the moment and been like, oh shoot, that's correct. I need to adjust for that. And times where it has taken years of me hearing it for it to click. And I do think it's different when, at least as a man, when women call me out for things versus when men do. I hear them differently, and usually the approach that they take is different. So that's just a useful section there. So on to section 4. We're moving through this now. Section 2.4, the eternal sins of Eve and Adam. Okay, so I'm going to offer another quote. All right. And this one's going to kind of start mid-quote, so I apologize. We're going to kind of slope into it. You have established a conceptual structure, but a fringe remains. That which, or indeed those who, do not fit the ordered pattern and are marginalized. Should the order be restructured so that all those who do not fit can now be included? This is not simply managed. A veritable multitude of forms lurk on the margin. No multiplicity can be made the center of a unity, and there is no perception, much less stability or hope, in the absence of a unity. All is too much. Inclusion of the margin means entropy overwhelms order. And if the margin is not sufficient to overwhelm, the margin of the margin will most definitely suffice. Every fringe has its more extreme fringe. So, end quote, sorry. This is in response to the Garden of Eden and things being kept out. This paragraph, oh, moving the screen, geez. This paragraph can be easily misread. What he is not saying is that we should be frivolently discriminatory and marginalizing of people. What it is saying is that there are circumstances where we ought to leave things on the margin. So I think that can be a hard thing to take in, but my note here I think might help with that. So must we integrate all that is marginalized? Will order be overwhelmed if all is included? Say the fringes, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, the outer margin of the fringe. So think about a healthy friend group. Everyone's pretty healthy, and the new person wants to join the group. Maybe they're a different gender or a different race, and you don't really even think about it. You're like, that's not how we marginalize anymore. Doesn't even cross your mind. You're like, yeah, cool, they're cool. We let them in. So that's fine. That's not the margin we're talking about. What we're talking about is somebody wants to come into the group and they have a pretty known history, at least through the grapevine and maybe some firsthand evidence, that they will sexually assault people. Okay. Well, do we let that person into the friend group? Perhaps it's better. Let's just say they're a guy and their history is assaulting women. Let's just say, no, we don't let them into the friend group. But maybe the guys decide they're going to invite him to guys only hangouts and try to talk about that behavior and try to present the alternative of this isn't okay. Now, I know my example, if this person is actively sexually assaulting, there's probably other stuff that hopefully we're telling people who can do something about it. I get it. Maybe I should pull this down to, um, you know, comments that are not quite safe or actions that really push the boundary there. And these guys integrate the guy into the guy hangout, this margin that they can help steward towards more productive order without bringing him around women and especially children to potentially cause harm. So we integrate that margin. What if this is a murder? Do we want to integrate that? What if this is someone who actively is just harming people and they love it? Do we integrate them? Do we invite destruction into our homes so willingly? And I think that's the question. That complete unification of everything will create destruction. And this is just, it's not me giving an opinion so much as a reflection tool. And if I were to give an opinion, I would say the ability to integrate as much as possible into healthiness is such a high value. Also, I'm only one person. My friend group is only one group. My church is only one group. My city, my country is only one thing. And we have to stay healthy in that integration. So I would rather healthily save one person every month than destructively attempt doing it 5 times a month, if that makes sense. So how do we integrate with health from outside the margin, and where do we draw a line that says under no circumstances ever allowed? You are welcome in the group, but under no circumstance are you allowed to be sexually aggressive towards anyone in this group. It is unacceptable. We love you, and it's not allowed because we love the group as well. And that's, I think, the point of this is how do we make sure that the proper things stay on the fringe and stay marginalized? I know that can sound like aggressive language in some sense, but just worth pondering. For anyone following along, that's on page 55. I could ponder that for a long time. So I wanted to bring it up because I think it is important how we integrate. And I'm someone who, I just really like good relationships. I don't really like conflict. And the question of how do we care for the most people efficiently is hard. And as a therapist, and many therapists I think would agree, you just want to say yes to everyone, but that is a spreading too thin of the person, which we'll go into in a minute actually. And that breeds its own form of destruction and breeds its own form of pain and disaster when you just flood everyone in. It doesn't work. If you've ever seen the movie Mother, which I don't even think I recommend, and this is not the point of the metaphor in that movie, it's a weird movie. But as you watch the movie, more and more people come to the house and just destroy it. It's a metaphor. I'm, again, no opinion on the movie, but just that imagery is kind of what I'm saying there. Is if we let every single person into our healthiness, it will destroy. So we have to be selective and we have to pace it and do our best while we encourage other people to do their best, while we encourage our group to do their best and our community to do their best. And there are lines, and it's really, 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 really hard to process that out safely and healthily. Just having coffee. This is a gift. I'm not any of those 3 things, but I appreciate the crazy plant lady moniker. I do like this, though. All right, moving on. Okay. This is a lot of stuff that I highlighted here. I mean, if you're this far in, I think you're probably committed, but I'm going to read a relatively long section here, and I'm just going to read the long section. We're over halfway through, don't worry. Eve's sin, hearkening to the blandishments of the eternally serpentine. Adam's sin, hearkening endlessly to the voice of Eve. Sins of pride in both cases. In Eve's, the narcissism of compassion. I am the mother who can encompass all. Adam's sin, I can retool and rename order itself indefinitely. All to impress Eve. Both presume too much, albeit for different reasons. Reasons that nonetheless find their union in that prideful sin. End quote. I'm going to do the rest of the quote in a minute. That's what I was getting at a moment ago. This to both the capacity side and the feminine masculine. The feminine side, the Eve side there of integrating. What was the quote here? The I am the mother who can encompass all. We just can't. And I'll, to help with that gender spread there, use myself as an example as a man. The feminine side there is the therapist, the caretaker. I cannot say yes to everyone. I'll be spread too thin. And instead of a healthy mother, so to speak, I will be destructive and vindictive and bitter and resentful because of my overstretching my pride of I can do all of this. I can care for a couple hundred clients, no problem. But I can't. It's an overextension. And the sin of man there, the masculine sin, is that I can retool and rename order itself. Now, again, the caveat there is to impress the feminine, but that's the guy who says, yeah, I can fix your window, and he has no idea what he's doing. And it just causes the window to be more broken, or we wasted our money with him, and he's just trying to impress or just trying to prove that he can. But he couldn't, and he shouldn't have said that he could. That's the idea. So for me, it's recognizing, in maybe even my own marriage, what I can and can't fix. I think part of me presenting proper masculine side there is to see a problem. And if I can't fix it, to ask that question, can I learn how to fix it? And if it's a pressing issue, I need to call the right person, plain and simple. Now, there's value in me learning how to do more and more of these. And the older I get, the more tasks I learn how to do just on my own. But in an attempt to make sure that my spouse is cared for, I'm not going to attempt to fix the refrigerator and break something and cause us to now have to spend extra on a whole new fridge when we might have just had to replace the tube, but I wanted to prove that I could do it. No. I need to know my line to keep order structured. And again, a sin of pride, to not take it as a prideful ego hit that I didn't know how to fix the fridge. I don't know how to fix it. I'm going to call someone. And if they let me, I'd like to watch them do it. Maybe I'll learn how. Or maybe I'll watch them fix it and be like, oh, yeah, I would have destroyed the fridge. I'm glad you did that. So, yeah, that's my thought there. Yeah. Yeah, my note here. How much does our pride ground our sinful nature? And I think he asked that question here after this book. If we could just eliminate pride, how much would that free us to benevolence? Next quote. The temptation that eternally confronts the woman, therefore, is the idea that maternal benevolence can be pridefully extended to the entire world, to even the most poisonous of snakes, and the associated temptation to make much of that on the social front, to use her compassion, however ill placed and false, to claim unearned moral virtue and ability, to draw undeserved attention to herself from individual men of interest or within her broader social community. Maternal compassion is the spirit of the feminine, bestowed on the individual woman. It is not something to take pride in, as it is not, as such, an individual accomplishment. It is instead something that can be invited in to possess, and that must be regarded in a humility as a gift from God. A talent bestowed, rather than a flag of virtue to be presumptuously and self-servingly paraded. The parallel temptation, confronting the man, is to hearken to this false voice of inclusive and indiscriminate familiarity and kinship, and to claim for his own self-serving and self-aggrandizing purposes the capacity to expand beyond its limits the domain over which he has established a certain degree of mastery. So he said it in his 50th grade reading level. I said it in mine. Final quote from this page as we move on towards a later section. There is a corresponding and equally deadly sin of Adam, the fundamental temptation or flaw of the masculine. The proclamation to Eve, I can incorporate, master, name, and subdue, and put into proper order anything that you bring before me, no matter how overreaching, preposterous, or even outright deadly the presumption of that it is to be included. All to impress Eve, as men often do, so often to impress women. So, my final note on that page is that maternal compassion should not be given to all. The snake may bite you for your naivete, and men cannot solve all problems and be the impressor of all women. The snake comment that I made to clarify that, because these notes are often just for me, is my overreaching compassion can result in being hurt. That doesn't mean don't be compassionate. Underreaching compassion can do that too. The hurt there being more metaphorical of I've overextended to too many people and I'm hurting almost myself, or the one little prick I get from that person pushes me over the edge because I'm overly caring. If you're very high trait agreeableness, which a lot of therapists are and a lot of people who struggle with boundaries are, this is a cue for you. If you find yourself saying yes very easily all the time, here's a way to prevent that. The moment that you start to find yourself feeling bitter or resentful towards the things and people that you love is the moment you need to put up boundaries and step back a couple steps, because you're overextending and you're not putting your boundaries up properly. That is why you are bitter towards the thing or towards yourself for your actions. I'm bitter and I'm resenting my friend. They always cancel on me. They do it all the time. Well, you're also admitting in that moment that you're aware that they do that. Stop scheduling on their time. You're bitter and resentful because you're not putting up a boundary around your scheduling. They're acting the way that they do, which is disrespecting of your time. Or they're in a phase of life where they have to cancel all the time. So you have to build that relationship around an inability to develop bitterness and resentfulness, i.e., a boundary and an ability to say no. So take that. Final quote of the section. Even in the aftermath of his error, he could have refused to cast the blame on his mate and the divine force that produced her, accepted responsibility for his insufficiency, this is Adam, and atoned. But no, worse, he doubled down on his pride, extending it even to self-righteously and self-pityingly claiming moral superiority over God. Thus, everything that transpired and that continues to do so. So just a big calling out of men's proclivity to just self-aggrandize and make it everyone else's fault. In the, what is it? Self-pityingly claiming moral superiority over God, that might be a question mark. Many people interpret the, if you've read that section of scripture, God questions Eve about eating the apple. She says the snake did it. So that's her not accepting her own responsibility. God asks Adam about eating it, and he says, the woman you gave me offered it to me. So he's blaming the woman. She gave it to me instead of saying, I shouldn't have eaten it. He knows where it came from. And he's blaming God. And in that blame puts himself above God. The woman that you gave me this sinful tempter that manipulated me and made me behave this way. You see that nice guy kind of syndrome piece coming up? That's what's going on. And that's the note that I have here. The quote, nice guy syndrome, which I at this point should just do a video on, manifested in Adam's sin, not taking accountability and doubling down on Eve and God being in the wrong. You see how that can look gross when you read it that way? Sometimes scripture, the emotional kind of nuance there gets lost in how just tight the scripts are. But I mean, that's what he's doing, is he's blaming both God and woman. And he's blaming God through the woman. Like, this is the woman you gave me. Why'd you give me someone who... Sorry, I'm going to be extra extrapolating here on the last comment. But it is a circular way, not a circular way, a direct way of just blaming the woman that you gave me made me do this. So, yeah. Okay, section 2.5. Which I actually don't have a lot of notes on, but I have one starred note on it, if you're ready. Quote, do you live successfully as of now in paradise? If not, does that mean that the cosmic order itself is of questionable validity? Or that your perspective is dreadfully flawed? Better pray that it is the latter, rather than the former, because there is no hope if it is the former. Better look toward your own inadequacy and attempt to rectify it before calling God out for his insufficiency. Whether you believe in God or any type of higher order, that is, you really need to wrap your mind around that. That's my strong encouragement. And I'll explain why in the note that I have here. If you're noticing like my weird breaths and if it's coming in the audio, I clearly don't know how to breathe when I'm like reading. I can talk fine, but I'm like reading off stuff. I'll be just going through and be like, And I'm like super self-aware of that. So I don't know why, but that's why I get my weird breaths over this hour. When things are less than ideal, do we blame God or self? It is frightening if God is to blame, if the cosmic order is created to our detriment. How much more freeing and safe is it to know that we are in the wrong? Because we can correct our wrongs, fix our perceptions. But if the cosmic order is set against us, well, we're screwed. Think about that. If the universe, and in the context of this reading, the context of this reading is God. If God is creating a world against you, you're straight up just screwed because that is a cosmic order thing. If I'm unhappy and I hate my life, it's way better for that to be my fault than God's fault. And blame God is an Adam type sin, just this prideful. God, the world that you gave me is wrong. You gave me this, and I'm just falling victim to this failure. It's just a stupid way to respond to it. And again, you don't have to be any type of religious to have this perspective. And I don't say stupid to put anyone down because we all fall into this. It's just more to be dramatic with the languaging there, but it's just so much safer for you to be the problem. And this isn't a way to self-deprecate, but if I have some control over my happiness, then that means I have control over it. If I can go out and change my life to make it better, thank God, because I can do that. If I get a cancer diagnosis and it's terminal and there's nothing we can do. There's nothing that's not on me anymore. Now, ironically, there's usually still things you can do to make your life better, even if it's terminal. You can choose to do certain things to make those last moments better. So the idea here is it's way safer to, at the very least, start internally. What have I done wrong? What can I do to improve this? And sometimes it is outside of us. That's super true. But it's so much more freeing to just start. And again, this is not a shame or self deprecating thing. If you're using this to shame yourself, it is being improperly used. It should be used as a way to encourage. Oh man, I don't have the money I want. I don't have the friends I want. I don't have the type of family I want. I don't have the type of life I want. What can I do to change that? What can I do today to start fixing that? As opposed to like, that's my life. So that's important. Penultimate section 2.6. Here we go. Naked suffering as the fruit of sin. Quote, it is therefore an open question whether suffering itself is a consequence of the structure of existence, of our subjugation to disease, insanity, social rejection, malevolence, and death, or whether it is equally, or more, or even completely, a consequence of the foolish self-conceit that tempts us to claim, narcissistically, more than is warranted. Yeah, I'm going to read the second quote on this page and then reflect on both a little bit. This is another quote that I've starred. Most of them don't get the star. Imagine that we confronted that which is anomalous, that which is outside rejected, in the proper proportion, that we took on only those tasks for which we were truly suited. Imagine that on the feminine side we insisted on our capacity only for the benevolent care we could completely provide. We could competently provide, rather, and without resentment. Imagine that on the masculine side we admitted to the insufficiency of our conceptions, without insisting too self-servingly on tyrannically on their comprehensiveness or completeness, or agreeing too thoughtlessly to adjust them merely to impress. End quote, and apologies for my inability to read that properly. I spoke on this already, and so I'll just give a couple more thoughts, but it's the reflection there of speaking within our competency and our ability to do a role, as stated with feminine caretaking and masculine problem solving. And even there, he mentions which I brought up a minute ago, that we could competently provide and without resentment. That resentment and that bitterness comes up when we overextend ourselves towards caretaking tasks. So, my Quick note on that from the first paragraph, the suffering one. How much of our suffering comes from taking more than we are warranted? Isn't that interesting? Because people often take more because they feel like they need it or they are warranted in it. You know, place has free snacks and you take, and it says just take one and you take two. You're like, I can't afford food right now. I need to take two. I'm going to overextend. I'm going to take more than it's offered here. The question there is more of an overextending piece. Look within your realm. So one, that's just like breaking a rule, whether it's law or not, still breaking a rule. If you're interested in diving into that more, look at the shopping cart test. It's a very interesting and wise analogy worth reflecting on. The shopping cart test. And the second thought there being in regard to taking more than you're warranted in the sense of your capacity and capability to do a task. I struggle with this in I need to pump the brakes more than I often do and say yes to less things so that I can do them well as opposed to more things done poorly. And my second journal entry this page, which I also starred in response to the starred paragraph. What would it look like to only say yes to the tasks we were suited for, and yes to caretaking others with care that we can completely provide? So I think we'd have a very different world if we only said yes to that which we could do. Very, very different world. Okay. Page 70, quote, likewise, this is just interesting, to be clear. This is somewhat disconnected with the rest of the content. Likewise, experts who choke under pressure often do so because they substitute for the neurological systems that now mediate their well-practiced and automatized performance the not at all specialized general alarm system that produces self-reflective negative emotion. Just again, a mouthful there. The me summary, written here in my notes, is that self-consciousness is highly correlated with performance failure. The more self-aware I am and self-conscious I am, the more likely I am to fail at the performative task. So for me, tomorrow I'm going to be playing a music set on bass guitar. There's some things that I'm not fully adept at that I'd like to be a little bit better at with it, but for the most part, I feel fine. If I go up there and I'm concerned and super aware of the parts that I don't do perfectly, the chance of me getting in my head and actually missing those worse and even missing other notes is actually higher than if I just go up there and I'm like, I'm fine. I'm not personally reflective. If I'm outward focused on let me make this a good set and offer this set up as best I can from me, it's going to go better than if I'm like, oh no, it's about me. It's not. I'm just gifting this. It's not about me. That's likely going to go better for me and everyone involved in experiencing it. Okay. The last quote from this section, and then we just have one more very short section. Why the cursed state of the ground? That's a quote back to, unquote there, to Genesis. Gosh, I like sassed myself on that. That was weird. The ground that Adam and Eve work is essentially cursed after the fall. So this is a bit in response to that. Quote, why the cursed state of the ground? Is it not because increased self-consciousness and the knowledge of the uncertain future that accompanies it motivate us to toil in the present, to delay gratification, to work, to stave off privation and suffering in the future? The concepts of work and sacrifice are essentially identical. Work is the sacrifice of the immediate delights of the present to the future and to the community. The fact that work becomes necessary after expulsion from paradise means that the question of what form of work best suffices or fails, what form of sacrifice best pleases or most displeases God, immediately becomes the paramount question. Man is destined to work. What then is the great work? The form of sacrifice most pleasing to what is highest? This is the central concern of the entire biblical corpus and all its literary derivatives. Something truly indistinguishable from the issue of the meaning or significance of life, or even being itself, or even the nature of the Creator himself in relationship to man. I'm pretty obsessed with understanding work and rest. Obsessed is dramatic. I'm very preoccupied by it. It just intrigues me a lot. Now, one thing he leaves out there, I don't know if this was on purpose or on accident, but if you actually read the Old Testament story of the fall, work is actually present before sin enters the garden. God gives the land to Adam to toil, correction, to work and steward. After the fall, he is going to toil. So there's a difference between the two in how work is presented, but work is not a consequence of the fall. I actually disagree with him on that just from a basic reading of the text. Work happens before the fall, but it is different. It even happens in God. He creates the world in 6 days and then rests. He rests from the work that he's done. So a sinless, is according to biblical mythology there, lore, canon, whatever verbiage. Text says that a sinless world and a sinless existence still has work in it. The difference is the curse there is that it's going to be more of a toil and it will not necessarily include the joys that sinless work would have. I think that's an important distinction to understand. So, just to know that. My note here is that work and how to make it pleasing to the Lord is a central concern of Scripture and life after it, plus the biblical derivatives from the text. That's more for me to reflect on. Is that really a central theme? Because he argues it is. And so that's for me to look at more. And says it actually comes up in a lot of biblical derivatives, which I think is true. So people's texts on the text of Scripture is often related to how we're to function in life and work in life. So, wrapping up, we'll do the final section, section 2.7, Loss of Paradise and the Flaming Sword. Short quote: What is sinful cannot attain the heavenly reward. Paradise would simply not be paradise if it contained anything unworthy. I don't have a note for that. That's pretty straightforward and just an interesting thing to think about. That can the idea of paradise have anything sinful or unworthy of that paradise? It's also interesting because if you say, I want paradise, and I say, oh, I want paradise, and we have to list everything that paradise has, I guarantee you're going to put something in there that I don't want. And I guarantee you, I'm going to put something in there that you don't want. And I guarantee you that both of us are going to put something in there that we in 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years from now don't want because we don't really know. So it's an interesting idea that paradise will not meet our expectations because our expectations are limited in in beings that don't understand paradise. That's an interesting concept. Another short quote: What aspect of self is answering as opposed to the self that is questioning? So he's talking here before about what it looks like to ask a question, and he's essentially equating prayer with thought and thinking, and that when a scientist asks a hypothesis, it's a form of prayer. I get that. I understand. Don't worry. But the idea is that we're like proposing this question, and the deeper question within the question, or outside of it rather, is where does this thought come from? Why is a hypothesis there? Why are we curious? Why do we use language around this thought just came to me, or it occurred to me, or it was like this spontaneous. We use a bunch of examples. Stroke of brilliance. It came to me. I realized that. Saw things in a new light. I was moved. Um, the argument there is essentially like, where are these movers coming from? When people say they thought deeply about something and then it occurred to them, that's a weird statement because that implies that that was already inside. When you ask a question and then the answer occurs, you didn't know it before you asked it, but you didn't talk to anyone. You just were with self and you got the answer. So he's making an argument there that that's a form of prayer and that something is inside that brings that up. And so, that's in a non-spiritual way, something non-spiritual people need to kind of reconcile, like where that discovery comes from. And an argument that spiritual or religious people can make is that comes from a spiritual or religious place, potentially. My note there is that personal questioning and expansion of thought are a form of prayer, an opening of self to higher order and knowledge in the hopes of gain. Why even ask personal questions of ourself? What unknown self is even answering? So, last few quotes. What we see is dependent on where we are determined to head. as what makes itself manifest to us, even in the realm of fact, are pathways forward and impediments to that progress, with everything else relegated to the realm of irrelevance and invisibility. I know I've talked about this before, and maybe it was in the 2 previous videos, but the idea there is what we aim at is what we hit, essentially. It's the whole thing that people will talk about. Have you seen a red car today? And someone's like, I don't know if I saw a red car at all today. And then if I say, well, for the rest of the day, I want you to look for red cars, you're going to see them because that's what you're aiming at, so to speak. You're looking for red cars now, if that makes sense. There's a quote I want to find because it's actually relevant to this. So, my note here is that our goals determine our perceptions of the world around us. So, whatever we're aiming at, we're going to find that. So, someone who believes the world's an evil place, they're just going to see evil behaviors, and so much so that they're going to assign evil behaviors to neutral actions. So, someone just forgets to call you on your birthday. They're an awful person. They don't care about me. They don't love me. They might have just forgotten. That sucks. Versus someone who is viewing the world in a positive and healthy place. They're optimistic, maybe. My friend didn't call me. Something must have come up. Or they might even say, oh, they just forgot or didn't know. No big deal. We perceive the world the way we are aiming ourselves at the world. There's a quote that I like, and I'm actually struggling to figure out who said it. So if you know, please comment it because I don't know why it's not coming up. It's just been used by a lot of people. It's that we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. So I don't see the world as it is, I see it as I am. Okay. The last starred quote of this chapter. Oh, but then I have one starred sentence, sorry. Quote, the pathways to destinations aimed at by motivations that are resentful, immature, self-serving, bitter, and vengeful, murderous, genocidal, deicital, will be demarcated by spirits with those natures. If you pray or think toward improper ends, then you will be answered by demonic voices. Isn't that interesting? So my note, prayers or thoughts done in hate will be answered in the voice of the demonic devils of hate. Prayers in love responded to with love, God, the divine. If my heart comes into prayers or thoughts, the heart of hate, you could ask the question of, am I praying towards something and thinking towards something that coexists with my current state of being? Would it not then respond to me as I am? So if I'm thinking negatively, am I not going to have negative answers come to mind? Worth thinking about. This is why it's actually a very strong recommendation in a lot of Christian circles to clean your heart up before you make sacrifices or before you even pray at times. That doesn't mean we can't go into our thoughts and go into prayers and go into conversations with other people in a state of I'm just kind of broken and I'm hurting and I'm struggling with anger and hate and all this. But it does mean don't enter in with that as an okay state of being. So I can be angry and struggle with anger, but I shouldn't go into my requests with I'm angry and I'm okay that I'm angry and I'm going to make this request in anger because then you're going to get an answer in anger is kind of the idea there. So just an interesting. I also add a note here that the first answers are not always correct. This is in response to this Carl Jung quote. Carl Jung noted our generalized proclivity. Sorry, this is Peterson's quote about Carl Jung. Quote, Carl Jung noted our generalized proclivity to, quote, succumb to the most uncritical way to the slightest possibility of finding some kind of answer or certainty, unquote. Jung was describing a form of willful blindness. So the first answer is not always correct, and that ease and availability are not synonymous with accuracy. So just because you get an answer doesn't mean it's right. That's the availability heuristic. I think might be availability fallacy, but I think it's the availability heuristic there is we just take the path that's most available. Oh, that's the answer someone gave. Works for me. Uh, why is the sun yellow? It's just because humans perceive it as yellow. Cool. Well, that's not the whole answer. It's actually not really yellow. You stare at it, it's like white. It hurts your eyes. So just don't accept the first answer. It's not always right. And that if you're pursuing truth, you also have to be willing to wrestle through not getting the answer that's true right away and wrestle through wrong um, got responses sometimes because you are trying to change. In pursuit of truth, you change. And that means your inclinations have to change. And it means, in some essence, parts of how your self manifests has to change. Your default will change at times. My default is towards negativity and I'm trying to be more positive. Why did my friend not text me? Oh, he hates me. Obviously. No. Is there other reasons? I'm trying to work on my negativity. That was a negative response. Even though it came to me first and quickly. Is that true? Maybe, but it also might not be. I'm trying to address this in a different way. Let's see if there are other options for what might happen. So, and then I underline that post-intuition critical evaluation is of crucial importance. So that's what he was saying there. And I starred that. All right, last quote and last thoughts. This process of warring idea personality within is no different than the war of the gods in heaven, played out on the broader communal scale. It is merely, that war playing itself out locally, in the psyche of the thinker, and then in the imaginations of those affected by his thought. The takeaway here for me being that the inner war of the psyche represents the cosmic war occurring between light and dark, heaven and hell, God and the devil. So, more or less, this inner turmoil that we have is a form of what's happening on a cosmic scale when we look at all that is good and all that is evil. And to circle this back around to the very beginning, that first thing that we discussed here, what was the word? Do we remember? Such an opportunity to elegantly circle that back around, and then I goofed on it. Circle it back around to kenotic, the emptying of a vessel. If we're created in the image of God, and there are aspects of the spiritual that exist in a way that we don't understand, and there's a warring heaven and hell, so to speak, and we're created in part in the image of that, then the inner struggles that we have perhaps are also a representation of the cosmic struggle that is happening. And that when we pursue truth and when we pursue light, we can find that. But it might have to be going through a lot of filth and a lot of evil and a lot of dark and a restoration and destruction at times of our own self to find it. So that's chapter 2. That's not even a whole book. This is why these are done in chapters. It's the longest video I've ever done, and it's for a ninth or something of a book. Crazy. So, love to anyone who watched all this. That was a lot. So, yeah, chapter 3, God willing, on Wednesday would be the goal. If I can get it out. It's a long chapter. It's like 80 pages. So, we'll see. But that's this one, and they're coming. Don't worry. I've heard you. I've seen you. I want to get these done. So, that's that one. Thanks for tuning in and giving this the time. If you've made it this far, I beyond appreciate that. That's crazy that you found this valuable enough to make it this far. So thank you. And I'll look forward to seeing y'all later. See ya. Oh, wait. I didn't do this enough during the video. I actually really want to hear people's thoughts on this because none of my close friends are reading this. Give me your thoughts, please. I know more of you watch the shorts and the videos, but if you're watching this and you made it, please tell me what you think on, especially chapter 2, because that was the point of this video, but any of it's fine. I love to hear it. And the channel's small enough that I can respond to all of you. So give me your thoughts. I love it. I look forward to doing the rest of it with y'all. See ya.